The 9 a.m. train to Boston was waiting on the tracks. It was shiny and silver, sitting under the big glass roof of the train station. Sunlight came through the tall windows, making the floor sparkle. People in fancy clothes walked around, pulling their expensive suitcases. The first-class car looked beautiful. It had soft leather seats, golden railings, and quiet music playing. Important people sat inside, drinking coffee and looking at their phones. This was a place for rich and powerful people, the kind who never had to wait in line. Eleanor Sinclair belonged in first class. She walked onto the platform like she was a queen. She was tall and confident, wearing a perfect gray suit. Her hair was in a neat bun and everything about her looked expensive. She held a fancy leather bag in one hand and a perfectly folded coat in the other. When the train worker smiled and said, "Welcome, ma'am. Your seat is 3A, Eleanor just nodded. She stepped inside the first-class car, where everything was fancy and perfect. The air smelled nice like wood and oranges. The glasses on the table shone in the light. Everyone here knew how to act properly, staying quiet and polite. Then she saw him. Seat 3B. A man in a brown hoodie and old jeans was sitting there reading a book. His sneakers were clean but simple. His hair was messy like he didn't try to fix it. A soft, old backpack sat by his feet. Eleanor stopped walking. Something inside her felt tight. Was this a mistake? Was she in the wrong place? She looked around, waiting for someone to fix it. But no one did. The man looked up, nodded at her, and went back to his book. Eleanor sat down stiffly, adjusting her jacket. She placed her bag carefully on her lap. Everything about her was neat and controlled. Everything about him was relaxed and careless. He had no watch, no tablet, no fancy suit. Just a book and no concern for the expensive world around him. Eleanor's jaw tightened. First class was supposed to be special. And this man did not belong. The coffee cart rolled by, filling the air with the smell of warm espresso. People in suits typed on their computers. Lawyers read important papers. Eleanor ignored it all. She was too focused on the man sitting next to her. He was acting like he belonged here. But he didn't. She turned to him, looking straight at his face. "Do you always travel dressed like that?" she asked. Her voice wasn't friendly. The man looked up from his book. "Like what?" "Like you're about to run errands," she said with a small smile. "Or help someone move furniture." He closed his book softly and rested it in his lap. "Being comfortable isn't a crime." Eleanor gave a short laugh. "No, of course not. But this is first class." He nodded, calm as ever. "And I paid to sit here just like you." She narrowed her eyes. "That's the problem. Just like me. But you're not." A few people nearby started listening, though they tried not to stare. Eleanor leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "There used to be rules," she said. "When you sat here, you were supposed to look successful. You were supposed to have class, not slouch in a hoodie like you're waiting for a bus." He looked at her thoughtfully. "Maybe the rules changed." She scoffed. "Or maybe they got worse, to make room for people who don't know the difference." The air felt tight. The man watched her, not angry, just tired. Like he had heard words like hers many times before. "What difference are you talking about?" he asked. Eleanor didn't hesitate. "The difference between looking successful and actually being successful." Silence filled the space between them. "Are you still reading this? If you are, type the number 6 in the comments." The man leaned back in his seat and let her words float in the air. Then he said, "You spend a lot of energy trying to prove you're better than people who don't care what you think." Eleanor's lips parted, ready to snap back, but she noticed something. A young woman across the aisle was watching. A man 2 rows ahead had his phone tilted toward them. People were paying attention. She forced a smile, trying to stay in control. "I'm just saying," she whispered coldly, "if you're going to sit in first class, you should at least look the part." "And what part is that?" the man asked, pretending not to know. Before she could answer, the train worker came by. "Can I get you something to drink, ma'am?" Eleanor straightened up. "Yes, sparkling water. In a glass, not a can." The worker nodded and turned to the man. "And for you, sir?" The man looked up with the same calm expression. "I'm fine, thanks." As the worker left, Eleanor leaned in one last time. "You're not fine. You're just pretending not to notice the difference." He met her eyes. "And you're pretending the difference still matters." Then he opened his book again. The conversation was over. But the tension wasn't. The train moved quietly through the countryside, passing trees and small towns. Inside the first-class car, everything seemed normal. People typed on laptops, whispered in phone calls, and ate little snacks. But Eleanor Sinclair sat perfectly still in seat 3A. She looked calm, but inside she was not. Her foot tapped slightly. Her fingers drummed softly against her knee. She had won many battles in her life in boardrooms and big meetings. But this time she wasn't sure if she had won, or if she had just been taught a lesson she didn't want to learn. The train ride continued, the landscape outside shifting from city buildings to rolling hills. Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about the man sitting beside her. His words lingered in her mind. She hated to admit it, but they stung. She prided herself on being strong, on always being right. But was she right this time? Was looking successful really the same as being successful? She wasn't sure anymore. She glanced at the man again. He was still reading, calm and unbothered. It irritated her. She wanted him to feel uncomfortable. She wanted him to second-guess himself. But he didn't. He just turned another page completely at ease. For the first time in a long while, Eleanor Sinclair felt unsure. And she didn't like it one bit. The train ride continued, but inside her mind, something had shifted. Something she couldn't ignore. She was trying really hard to stay calm. Keanu Reeves had not said a single word since he closed his book, and that made things worse. It wasn't that he had been rude to her. He didn't roll his eyes, didn't laugh at her, and didn't even argue back when she kept saying mean things. No, what upset Eleanor the most was how calm he was. It wasn't the calm of someone who didn't understand. It was the calm of someone who had been through much worse and didn't care about small fights. And that scared her because it meant she wasn't bothering him at all. She turned in her seat, her voice smooth but sharp. You know, I really wish they had better rules for first class. Lately, it feels like anyone can sit here. Keanu didn't say anything. He didn't even blink. He just rested his hand on his book, looking straight ahead, breathing slow and steady. Eleanor waited, expecting him to react. When he didn't, she smiled, but not in a nice way. Then, without hesitation, she reached up and pressed the silver button above her head. A soft chime rang through the quiet train car. People looked up for a moment, sensing something happening before looking away. A young train attendant named Lila arrived quickly. She smiled, but she looked a little unsure. "Yes, ma'am? How can I help you?" Eleanor gave a polite smile that wasn't really friendly. It was the kind of smile people used when they were about to say something mean. "I just wanted to check something. I think there's been a little mistake with the seating. This man," she said, waving a hand toward Keanu without even looking at him, "may not be in the right seat. Mistakes happen, you know. Sometimes the wrong people get seated up here by accident." Lila blinked, surprised by Eleanor's words. She looked at Keanu, who calmly took his phone from his hoodie pocket. A few taps and he handed it to her, showing his digital boarding pass. Lila checked it against her tablet. A short pause followed. It wasn't long, but long enough for everyone to feel the tension. When she looked up again, her smile was cooler. "Mr. Reeves is in the correct seat, 3B. Eleanor's mouth opened in shock, but only for a second. She quickly covered it with a little laugh. "Oh, I see. Well, I just assumed." She stopped, letting her sentence hang in the air like a bad smell. Lila just nodded politely. "Please let me know if you need anything else." Then she walked away. The mood in the train car changed. Eleanor adjusted her scarf, trying to act normal, but she could feel it. People were watching. A passenger tilted their phone up slightly. Another paused their audiobook. No one said anything, but she knew what had happened. A small wave had started. Keanu still hadn't moved. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't even looked at her. But now, his silence was impossible to ignore. It was heavy like the sky before a big storm. Finally, he turned his head toward her. Not quickly, but slowly, like he had waited for just the right moment to speak. "Most people whisper when they don't want to be heard," he said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a sharp knife. "You, on the other hand, want to be heard." Eleanor sat up straighter. She folded her arms as if protecting herself. "Don't be silly. I was just..." Keanu spoke again before she could finish. "You weren't fixing a mistake. You wanted proof that someone like me doesn't belong next to someone like you." Eleanor scoffed, crossing her arms tighter. "That's ridiculous. I was just making sure." Keanu studied her. His eyes were still calm, but there was something sharper in them now. Disappointment, maybe. Or just understanding. "You weren't checking anything," he said. "You were trying to erase me." Eleanor didn't say anything. She couldn't. For the first time in years, someone had stripped away her polite, fake smile and left only the truth. And it stung. Keanu turned away, opened his book again and said nothing more. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loud, heavier than any argument, and it wasn't going to be forgotten. The train wheels rolled under them in a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat that didn't change, no matter how tense the air inside the train had become. Eleanor hadn't spoken for nearly 10 minutes, but not because she had nothing to say. No, this time she was picking her words carefully. She had made a mistake. That much was clear. She hadn't expected the man next to her to speak so clearly, so honestly, and worst of all, so truthfully. His words still rang in her head. You were trying to erase me. That wasn't something you could just brush off. Not when people around them kept sneaking little glances. Not when the silence between their seats was louder than any shouting match. But Eleanor Sinclair was not the kind of woman who stayed quiet for long. She wasn't the kind to back down. And she certainly wasn't going to let a man in a hoodie turn her into a silent character in someone else's story. She shifted in her seat, crossed her legs again, and spoke. Not to Keanu directly, but loud enough for him, and everyone nearby, to hear. You know what I miss most about first class? Keanu didn't look up, but she kept going. It used to mean something. The way people dressed, the way they spoke, the way they acted. Now it's just noise. Anyone with enough credit card points thinks they belong here. Her voice was soft but sharp, like a blade cutting through silk. A woman across the aisle lowered her newspaper slightly. Still, Keanu said nothing. He turned another page of his book, his eyes steady. Eleanor wasn't done. She needed to win. She needed to feel in control again. It used to be that when you walked into first class, you saw professionals, business people, people who mattered. Not, she waved a hand vaguely, people who just sit there in silence thinking that makes them special. She glanced at Keanu. Though I suppose that's the new trick, isn't it? Say nothing. Act mysterious. Let other people imagine you're important. At that, Keanu closed his book slowly, deliberately. He turned his head and looked at her. Not annoyed. Not angry. But with something worse. Understanding. You seem very interested in what doesn't belong, he said. Eleanor scoffed. I care about standards. No, Keanu said calmly. You care about control. And you're upset because you can't control me. For the first time, Eleanor sat differently. She always sat up straight like a soldier, but now she leaned back just a little. You don't know anything about me, she said, her voice not as strong as before. Keanu tilted his head. People show who they are when they think no one is looking. But you want the whole world to watch. You think being important makes you special. He paused. But it doesn't give you class. His words were quiet but powerful. The air in the train felt different now, heavier. Eleanor's throat felt tight. She turned to look out the window, hoping to escape, but it was too late. The space around her didn't feel safe anymore. It wasn't just hers. And deep inside, under all her pride, Eleanor felt something strange, something she didn't like. A tall black man in a gray suit walked past their seats on his way to the restroom. He walked calmly, nodding at the train attendant as he passed. Eleanor's eyes followed him, and then, without looking at Keanu, she said something soft. Too soft to be loud, but just loud enough to hear. First class isn't as special as it used to be. Keanu stopped reading. He didn't look at her right away, but he became very still. Eleanor kept going. Her voice was quiet but sharp, like she had practiced saying this before. It used to be that only certain people could sit here. Now they're giving fancy towels to just anyone. Keanu closed his book. Not fast, not in anger, just with finality. Eleanor smiled a little, like she had won something. Oh, I didn't mean you, of course, she added, turning toward him with a fake sweet voice. Though you are a little bit of a mystery, aren't you? Now Keanu looked at her. His eyes weren't angry, just tired, the kind of tired people get when they've heard the same thing over and over for their whole lives. You know, he said softly, people show who they are when they think they're whispering. Eleanor blinked. He wasn't joking. He wasn't pretending. He was done acting like she hadn't just crossed a line. I was just making conversation, she said, her voice sharper now. No need to be so dramatic. Keanu didn't reply. He didn't have to. The silence between them changed. It wasn't just a pause, it was judgment. And around them the other passengers felt it too. No one looked at Eleanor directly, but she felt it. They had all heard her. And this time no one was pretending they hadn't. Eleanor sat stiffly, her arms crossed, staring out the window. But she wasn't looking at the trees or the towns rushing by. She was thinking about the words she couldn't take back. She felt the weight of them. The glances from others, not harsh, not loud, but there. Just enough to tell her that her words, which once made her feel powerful, now made her feel small. She tried to pull herself together. She adjusted her scarf, smoothed her blazer, lifted her chin. But it didn't help. The train slowed as it neared Boston. The attendant returned, not Lila this time, but an older woman, someone important. Her name tag said Margaret. She walked with confidence, but when she saw Keanu, her face changed. She nodded at him, not just politely but with real respect. "Mr. Reeves," she said softly. "Welcome aboard." Eleanor's head snapped up. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. Margaret turned to Eleanor. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" Eleanor stared at her, then at Keanu. Her throat felt dry. She spoke, but her words were shaky. "Wait, you know him?" Margaret stood tall. Her voice stayed calm but firm. "Everyone in our company knows Mr. Reeves. He is one of the new owners of Northern Rail Prestige." Then a pause. Silence filled the train. "He co-owns the company." Eleanor's world didn't just shake, it broke. The man in the hoodie, the man she had tried to embarrass, the man she thought didn't belong, owned the train. He owned the seat beside her. He owned the silence that now swallowed her whole. She tried to laugh, but it sounded empty. I didn't know. You weren't asking," Keanu said gently but firmly. "You were assuming." His words hit harder than any shout ever could. Margaret turned to Keanu. "Mr. Reeves, please let us know if there's anything we can do." "I'm good, thank you," Keanu replied, his voice steady. Eleanor didn't say another word. She couldn't. She just sat there, frozen in her fancy seat, surrounded by a silence that no longer belonged to her. Outside, Boston was getting closer. But for Eleanor Sinclair, the real destination had already arrived, and it was humiliation. The train barely started slowing when Eleanor felt a buzzing in her purse. Her phone. It was soft, just a little vibration, but it hit her harder than anything said on this train. Then came another buzz. Then another. Faster now, as if the whole world was catching up to what had just happened. She didn't reach for it. She didn't have to. Her hands, once so steady when holding champagne glasses at parties or microphones at big events, now shook in her lap. She pressed them down, trying to stay in control. But deep down she already knew, this wasn't just between her and Keanu anymore. This wasn't just a little mistake she could laugh off later. She had seen it earlier, a person across the aisle holding their phone up just a little too high. A quick movement, a tiny screen glowing. Someone had recorded her. And she had still said those words anyway, thinking no one would dare share them. Thinking she could control the story. But now, just a few seats away, a young woman with a ponytail and earbuds wasn't looking at Eleanor with amusement anymore. She was staring straight ahead, frozen. As if trying to act normal. As if she hadn't just hit the upload button. The screen in her lap glowed. Eleanor's eyes moved quickly to look at it. What she saw made her feel sick. There it was, her own face. It was a little blurry, but it was clearly her. Her mouth was open, her eyes looked mean, and her body looked proud. Next to her sat Keanu Reeves. He was calm, quiet, and kind. He looked the opposite of her. Under the video there was a short but cruel caption. It said, "Woman tries to remove quiet man from first class. She doesn't know who he is." The video had already been watched 40,000 times. Eleanor reached for her phone very slowly, as if touching it would hurt. The screen lit up with messages, too many to count. Texts, missed calls, emails. Messages from her assistant, her team, even her niece. Then the worst one, a text from someone she hadn't talked to in years. It said, "Tell me that's not you." Her stomach felt sick. She had to clench her teeth so she wouldn't throw up. She could hear the other people around her. They weren't laughing or whispering, but they were paying attention. The quiet, fancy train was now filled with a cold, judging silence. Eleanor had always believed she could control everything. If she smiled the right way, spoke softly, and looked perfect, she could make people see her the way she wanted. But now none of that worked. She felt like she was holding broken glass instead of her usual tools of charm and power. She turned to the window. But this time it wasn't to hide. There was nothing to hide behind anymore. For the first time in a long time, Eleanor understood what it felt like to be truly seen. Not the way she wanted, not the way she had planned, but how others really saw her. And the internet, she realized too late, was not a place that forgave easily. The train made a loud hissing sound as it stopped at Boston's South Station. The doors opened with a heavy noise. Most people had only been on the train for a few hours. But for Eleanor, it felt like she had been there forever. Her chest felt heavy. She stayed in her seat as other people stood up, stretched, and grabbed their bags. They looked comfortable, like they belonged here. But Eleanor no longer felt like one of them. For a moment, she thought about staying seated until everyone left. Maybe she could sneak out quietly without anyone noticing. But it was too late. The story was already out. Her story was everywhere now. She picked up her phone again. The number of views had doubled. The comments were fast, mean, and everywhere. Her name used to be in magazines, on big business talks, and in fancy company meetings. Now her name was a joke, a warning, a hashtag. Behind her, a train worker opened the door. A voice spoke clearly, "Mr. Reeves, your car is ready." Eleanor turned just enough to see Keanu stand up. He thanked the worker, picked up his small backpack, and walked past her. She had thought his backpack looked out of place before, but now it looked simple and strong, just like him. He didn't look at her. He didn't smile or smirk. He wasn't happy about her trouble. He didn't need to be. He was just as calm as he had been the whole time. He didn't need money or power to show who he was. He knew himself even when others tried to push him down. He stepped off the train and disappeared into the crowd. A black car waited for him, and then he was gone. Now Eleanor was alone. She finally stood up, moving stiffly. She grabbed her coat and stepped onto the train platform. Her heels made the same sharp sounds as before. But now, the noise disappeared into the air, swallowed by the sounds around her. People were holding up phones, cameras flashing. She could hear them whispering, talking about her. Someone called out, "Miss Sinclair, do you regret what you said?" Another voice shouted, "Did you really try to remove Mr. Reeves?" She walked faster. More voices, more cameras, more questions. She had no time to explain. No way to fix it. She tried to hold her head high, but even her sunglasses couldn't hide how hot her face felt. Her phone buzzed again. A short message from her boss. "We need to talk. Now." She stopped walking for just a second. At that moment, she realized what had really ended when the train stopped. It wasn't just the ride. It was her control. Her voice. The perfect image she had built for so many years. No one came to help her. No coworkers, no friends, no team members. She was alone. And in the cold, busy train station, Eleanor Sinclair stood still. She barely even knew herself anymore. And the man she had tried to get rid of? He was already gone. In a world where people often think fancy clothes and expensive seats make someone important, Eleanor Sinclair learned something different. True class isn't about money. It's about how you treat people when you think no one is watching, and especially when everyone is. Keanu Reeves never got angry. He didn't try to get back at her. He didn't need to. His kindness, patience, and quiet strength spoke louder than any mean words. That's the power of having good character. It's strong. It doesn't break even when people treat you badly. If you like this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling adventures, mysteries, and unforgettable moments. Your support keeps these stories alive and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching. I can't wait to see you in the next video.